Ready?
We're ready. I think we're ready, if you're ready.
Okay. Good evening. World's a little different than it was the last time we met. So we can talk about the election or not talk about the election as you choose. We can start off, we can not do it at all, we can defer it to the end. I gave you the numbers comparing, as of yesterday, the day before, the popular vote 2020 compared to 2024.
Trump did win 50%. 50% is not right. Since then, it's been other counts.
It's a
49 point
yeah,
something. He didn't quite make 50%.
it's right.
Because of the other candidates running too, the third-party candidates.
Yeah.
He's not a majority president. I mean,
But unlike the last time,
wasn't a
this time
landslide.
he did get the
it wasn't a mandate, a landslide mandate.
yeah. I mean the news is 6 of the swing states flipped, as they say, went from one party to the other. But the biggest news, and this is what's curious to me, is when you look at the numbers, roughly 5 or 6 million people fewer voted for Kamala Harris than voted for Joe Biden.
Okay.
And about 1 million or 2, maybe more, voted for Donald Trump. So overall, you have, 5 or 6 million fewer people voting. So my question is, why did people think 2020 was an important enough election to go out and make sure they voted, but not 2024? I mean, what happened that people decided, not so important this time?
Pandemic, for one thing. Pandemic, that influenced people's voting, and people got a lot of absentee ballots too. There's more absentee ballots, wasn't there, in the 20?
Here, John.
Well, it was easier, and I think most states, though I don't really know precisely, I think most states kept a lot of those easy procedures in, but not all. And there were some controversies. I used to be in Pennsylvania, and they're still arguing about whether if you send in the absentee ballot and you forget to write the date on it, but it gets there on time, whether they can count it. Like, why is that a controversy? If it's there, is there any question that you got it in on time? But, you got to do something.
Well, maybe they didn't like the choices.
But they liked them they liked them in 2020, but they didn't like them in 2024? Mm-hmm. So there was only one difference in 2024.
That could just be the difference.
So what was it about this new entrant that you think was so magnificently different that roughly 5 million people said, not for me?
Oh, I don't know. The list is long. First, how she was chosen. He
All right.
waited so long to withdraw, and then she was anointed. And I confess I supported her, but she didn't run a primary. And so a lot of Democrats felt like, whoa, this is all,
So the remedy was she didn't run a primary, so I'll vote for him instead.
No, they didn't vote at all. They just don't vote.
And the logic to that would be?
Some people just get angry and resist.
Yeah, all right. I
mean, I think that could be one person, but there were millions of them, and they all probably have a reason. So,
well, if we want to make sure that people keep being engaged in the process, we need to know. Well, we at least need to, I don't know that we'll ever know, but we need to think about why.
Yeah.
But
I think that, so Obama got in because he was like change, hope and change. And Donald Trump got in, I think, because, make America great again. People wanted a change. They wanted something new. They wanted something different. And when Donald Trump ran for the second time, maybe people said, well, he really didn't do as much as we wanted to the first time.
all right. So
Like, where was the change? We already had Trump, and he didn't, I don't know, put Hillary in jail like he said he was going to do, or something like that. You know what I mean? Maybe people started getting disillusioned by the hope and change and the Make America Great Again, and they just said, we're not buying it anymore. We want something else, and this is not giving us what we want. So it's hard. So why get off my butt and go vote?
All right, so essentially the system doesn't work, therefore why bother?
Yes, and there's a campaign out there online that says voting is completely useless. Why, if you're voting, you're actually saying that you're supporting the system. I don't agree to that. I don't agree with that. But I have seen many memes and posts saying that if you vote, you're actually saying that you're participating in a corrupt system.
And your alternative would be to do what?
I like I said, I don't
Yeah.
agree with that, but I have seen.
Well,
those
you know,
types of posts.
there's an old saying, if you think you don't have power, you're right. If you think you don't have power. If you know that you do, that's also equally true. So let me suggest that at least in a post-election period, if not, and in a weird way, 2024 is sort of like the ultimate post-election, because it's sort of still post-2020. You really have 4 options of what you can do after an election happens. You can get mad, and we're suggesting that's what a lot of people did in response to 2020, by the way they acted in 2024. You can get even, which there is concern as to whether that's what's going to happen. You can get ahead, meaning you can use whatever power is available to benefit whatever cause and group you want to do that. And the last one, of course, is you can get ready for the next time. Historically, Americans love to get mad. We do that better than anybody. You know, we just love to. If we could run the government just by finding out who's at fault, most of us would think that's a success. And as you suggest, change isn't what matters. What matters is we identify who's at fault. Question is, are we now at a point where we're going to admit to ourselves? Doesn't really get you very far. You know, because the simple fact of the matter is, you know, depending on an issue, most of us are at fault over something sooner or later. Finding fault doesn't really help. And in a minute, I want to take a look at a document I handed you called How an Idea Becomes a Law. But let's talk about that in a moment.
I have another thought about the size of the vote. The Republican Party, Mr. Trump, made voting harder. I was a poll worker, and I saw that results where everybody was on edge about not making a mistake, and people were really concerned, and there were a lot of worries about what was going to happen in the polls. So people maybe avoided the polls because they're afraid of kind of violence there or interactions. But the vote was definitely restricted by the Republican Party and the Trump people.
In Maine?
No, nationwide.
All right, but what about Maine?
Well, I don't know about Maine. I thought I don't know about Maine.
Where were you a poll worker?
In Lebanon. Yeah.
All right, but it felt different to you than it did in earlier
The
elections.
election, it felt a lot different.
Okay.
There were a lot of people there too. A lot of people came out.
And fewer people showed up, or just fewer votes were cast altogether?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I don't know that. I didn't. It was 5-1 for Trump. I know that.
Well, yeah, but my guess is it probably was that in 2020 also, give or take?
I don't know that. Yeah.
Okay.
Just saying, the restriction of voting could have caused a reduction in the amount of people voting. In the fear of the polls, the fear of something happening at the polls that wouldn't be violence or intimidation.
All right. I mean, is that something that everybody was concerned about? That you didn't want to go to the polls because you were worried what might happen when you got there?
Well, I'll get to that. And I have one thing. from your the beginning concept is that listening to the some of the statistical talking heads, they were talking about the fact that a lot less people in the places where, like if you want to call them blue states, less people voted in those states than they did in 2020, where it didn't actually matter for Kamala Harris because she won by large amounts in those, but she didn't win as much in as large an amount as Joe Biden did. So, for example, New York, California, less people voted, less Democrats or less people who supported Biden Harris than supported Harris Walz. So she got less votes in those places where essentially it didn't matter. Those people felt disenfranchised for one reason or another, whether it was the war in Gaza or many other issues that people were told during the primaries to not vote as a protest. So the second thing is that when I got there at I don't know, just before 8 o'clock in the morning in Berwick, there was a larger armed police presence than I've ever seen. So I think even in Berwick, Maine, they took seriously that there might actually be people who were going to come and disrupt. It did not happen, but the presence was there.
I'm curious, did anybody feel that themselves, that, oh no, if I go to the polls, I'm worried about violence?
Well, I didn't personally.
Right, but did anybody in the room? Yeah.
I thought the police presence was due to the crisis that was happening at the school and the schools in Portland and other places where there was a threat and police presence was needed. And they did, in fact, interfere, those cyber attacks, with voting in Portland, Maine, and other places. So that's why I thought there was so much police presence that day.
All right.
I believe the police presence was planned.
All right.
I worked at the polls.
Okay.
And I knew there was going to be police officers there, as well as the vote checker or whatever that person is that comes and watches you every move you make.
But did the police say why they increased their presence? What they were worried about?
They were asked to be there to.
By the people running the election?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, the experts who claimed that the problem was fewer people voting in the states where it didn't matter anyway?
Well, that was what they said, but they also said that in the 7 states that were important in the election, more people voted for Donald Trump than they did the previous 2020 election. So the reverse effect happened in the most important states for him.
Yeah, and then if you look at the chart, I mean, the states, 6 of them flipped.
Yeah.
That's how you lose. Okay. So it's now December the 3rd. The new administration doesn't take effect until January the 20th. So what should a reasonable human being do now? How should a reasonable human being approach the next 4 years? What's to be done?
Keep in touch with the senator
Okay,
to avoid any kind of unconstitutional behavior.
all right.
Keep in touch with with those people who you feel the same way as you do, in order to be ready for any eventuality, and or keep in touch so that you can keep each other from getting too depressed.
All right.
Have something else to focus on, like I do. We have the Berwick Community Garden.
Well, I'm going to suggest that an opportunity like we now have in America doesn't come along often, in a good way, by which I mean clearly what I think everybody is saying is we want change, as you said. Well, if you want change, the only way it happens is if you participate, because my change may be different than your change. So if you want to make sure that your change is going to be considered, you got to be engaged in the process. So I would suggest that the most important thing to do right now is number 4, which is get ready for the next election. Because the way the system operates is there's always another election. And in some ways, sort of what you're describing is just that, which is things never quite turn out the way we want, so let's just change them the next time and take a chance. Now, you'd hope that at some point most of us would figure out maybe just changing sides each few years isn't really quite enough. And we need to do a little something more than just say, tired of wearing blue, I want to start wearing red, or vice versa. We will find out what happens. I mean, I would suggest again, as you did, there are lots of positive change going on, not all of it, and some, I guess, could say not any of it, at the national level, but lots of it going on elsewhere. When people start considering some of the changes in some of the national bills that were passed, maybe they won't be quite as negative. But clearly people were angry. And the one thing we know about anger is it rarely works out to your advantage to be angry. But sometimes it does. So we will find out. All right?
Well, one thing was that after the election, shortly after the election, it was reported, I don't know if it was much reality to it, but it was reported that there were people who inquired of their government, poll workers, etc., that they weren't satisfied with the vote that they cast, and how could they change it? No, I mean, I know that sounds supercilious, but I mean, the people were serious about that. They felt like they got bamboozled by, by Donald Trump, that he lied to them, that he did, what he usually does, and now they weren't satisfied, and they wanted to have a do-over.
You remember the movie Forrest Gump?
Yes.
And as I remember, the line is, stupid is as stupid does. It's a little late after the election to decide, maybe I didn't study up enough. Maybe I should have thought about this a little bit more. That's not the way it operates. But another way of looking at what you're saying is, most of us are just confused right now. We don't know what's going to happen. We've heard all sorts of things. Some of them we've already seen, but then some of the ones that we've seen haven't stood up. So nobody knows. And the one thing that's clear is nobody likes uncertainty. It's not good for the digestive system at all. Yeah.
Of course, this is my first time here, and I'm just curious. So this group right here is together. Have you guys been meeting for a long time?
No, this is the third meeting. We meet once a month on the first Tuesday of the month. And from my point of view, loosely the purpose of this is to see, can neighbors get together, talk nicely, and not want to kill one another? And so far, we're doing great. No homicides, no attempted homicides. It's all been lovely.
And I want to thank you all for that.
Yes.
So so this is it sounds like maybe just sort of extrapolating that or guessing that. So this is like post-Trump. People are freaking out and they're afraid and they want to do something about it. Is that what this group is about?
That's, no, not at all. No, it's simply, what's clear is the country is undergoing change. I mean, that was clear in 2012, 2016, 2020. We know that. We know that most of the leadership of the political parties are of a generation that will be giving up power, not continuing. So what happens next? Who happens next? What happens next? And we are all citizens here, in the broadest sense of the word citizens. And so we have goals and dreams and desires of what we would like to see happen. And here's a place to talk about it. I mean, that's what I think is going on here.
Excuse me, though? I thought we were dealing with the Constitution and the laws of the...
Yeah, and I'm
precedents.
going to get to that in just a moment. I mean, it's called searching for American values. So part of it is, I'm a big believer that if you want to solve a problem, you go back to the beginning, figure out why things were set up the way they were set up. What was the goal to be achieved, and is it still appropriate? So we've looked at some of that, and one of the ones I wanted to remind us of, 1787, Northwest Ordinance puts in a provision that says we want public education, and it says we want it for two reasons. One, we want it because it's good for the individual. You know, you'll learn stuff, you'll know how to read, it'll give you more options, you'll be a smarter person when you go to vote, and that's great. And the second reason we want to do it is it's good for a society to have people who have more skills and have more options available. Because you're less likely to be bamboozled if you have the ability to get information independently rather than have to get it from somebody else. And those two different values really are the bedrock of what America has stood for 200 and, what are we up to? 48 years, I think? And that is, part of what we stand for is individual freedom, the right to pursue what's best for you personally, individual, the pursuit of your self-interest. And at the same time, one of the themes is what's good for the group as a whole, for the public good, the common good. Now, there are people who claim you can't do both of those things independently. So my question to you is, can you? Is it possible for society to do, at the same time, to take steps which help individuals improve their place in the world by getting skills, opportunities, economic advantage, whatever, and at the same time improve the lot of the group as a whole? When most books on this subject will have the word or, meaning individual freedom or common good. Do you believe that?
Sounds good.
That it's or that it's and? Do you believe that the word should be or and in between?
And
Okay. Now I know some of you were teachers, I'm correct?
Yes.
All right. An easy example of a profession that definitely is and. Teachers want to get paid reasonable salaries, and at the same time they want to teach kids. That's both pursuing individual interest and community good. Okay. Yes, sir.
The preamble says to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty.
Yeah.
So that kind of answers the question.
Well, yes, kind of.
Like the pursuit of happiness. There's a lot of ands, ands and more in the Constitution. I mean, I think the Constitution was a document in which they had the best of all intentions, and they had no idea what was going to happen in 2024.
I don't think you give them enough credit. They knew two things. There would be a 2024, and it would be very, very different than 1787.
Right.
They knew both of those things. So what do we know about what the world looks like 248 years from now?
Oh,
Any thoughts?
in the future you're talking.
Yes, from now, yeah, in the future.
We'll be lucky if we're here.
Okay.
They might have thought the same
Because,
thing.
I mean, I'm a firm believer that nature abhors a vacuum, and that conservationists and ecologists have postulated that it would take 100,000 years for nature to reclaim our planet after we go extinct.
Okay.
And I think that, not that I'm a complete fatalist, where we do have
No one's perfect.
we we do have a chance, and we have it now, but we're not doing a very good job at going in that direction right at this moment.
All right. But we're doing better than we were doing 20 years ago, or not?
We're doing different. I don't think we're doing. I think we do a lot of this. If you want to graph human behavior against time, is that we have ups and we have downs, and there are some great moments and there are some really bad moments. And I think right now we're in one of our trenches, our bad moments.
All right. Yes, please.
I wanted to get back to the and/or question a little bit.
Uh-huh.
It came up last time too, where the individual, what was the term? The individual good versus the common good, or and/or. That's where compromise comes in, and isn't that what the development of the Constitution was all about?
All right. I don't know if I've asked this question before, but if I did, I'm going to ask it again. 1787, you're sitting in Philadelphia. You represent the state of Massachusetts because, of course, there is no state of Maine in 1787. And the question is, the South has said we will, let's take it back a little earlier. Let's go to 1776, prior to the Revolution. It's a little bit more of a crisis at hand. And the South says, we will not join you in your war against Britain unless you guarantee us that we can keep slavery for some period of time. And they decided later on what the period of time would be, but it was not, at least at that point, they were accepting not forever, but for some period of time. Would you have gone along with them? Would you have said, okay, we will let slavery continue because we need you to help us defeat Britain? How would you have voted?
We have to vote that way to survive the country, to have a country.
So you would have said, it's a compromise worth making.
Worth making, in order to have a country.
And anybody think it's not a compromise worth making?
Yes.
So you would have said, no, we will stay a part of Britain.
No, we're just not ready for what it is that we're trying to do. We have to try to do something different. But they obviously didn't do that, and they went ahead and then created the situation where a civil war had to take place in order for it to really happen.
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Okay. No, I mean the members of the Constitutional Convention made strategic decisions based on the situation at hand.
Yes.
But there were members of that convention who originally refused to be participants in that in that part of it, and they left. They didn't come back, and others from their area had to come in order to make it more or less unanimous.
All right.
So
Yes, but let's. I want to back up to 1776
okay.
with the war against Britain. Would you have voted to say, let's give the South what it wants because we need them to win the war against Britain? How would you have voted?
Well, as I said, I would have voted against it because I would have felt like the South was blackmailing the North into choosing something that they was an anathema to them, that was completely against their nature. But they were forced
Well,
into it.
we can discuss how true that was, but for the moment, say yes. So you would have said, I would rather stay a subject of Britain than start this war.
I think there were other alternatives, but they didn't have time to to make those. I think they were placed in the position where things were already happening, because in 1775 in Boston, they already dumped the tea into the harbor, and there was Lexington and Concord and things like that. I mean, things were happening at a pace in which a decision had to be made, and it was made.
Well, I mean, but in 1775, when the war started, and that is when the war started, it was a civil war, not a war of independence.
Right.
We then get to July, and the question becomes, do the 13 colonies go in this together, or do we split? I think it was 7-6 north-south, but I don't remember anymore.
Saying that you would, I agree with him. Who wants slavery? But I understand that, yes, we might not have gotten away from Britain at that point, but we don't know what would have happened under, different, if we hadn't. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like, oh, well, then we would stay under Britain forever. That's not what that means. If you vote to say, no, there's no way that I would ever support slavery under any conditions, that's a reasonable and very honorable answer. That doesn't mean that I want to be under Britain either. It means that later we might get out from under Britain's thumb.
But it would have meant, if I understand, that at least for then, we would still be subjects of Britain
Yeah, well,
at that point.
you have to, sometimes you just have to pick what is the lesser of two evils. I mean, some people might say, oh, well, we're kind of all slaves under Britain. Maybe someone might think that. I would say that the chattel slavery was just so abhorrent. I just don't think I could ever support that, even if that meant that. And I knew that later, I believe that later we would have gotten out from under the yoke of England later.
I mean, it's completely hypothetical, but
Yeah.
there were places in the South that had people. I don't know if he's legendary, mythical, or otherwise. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, he led a rebellion beside what the people in North Carolina, thought about it, and there were people joining him in order to bring about a revolution, despite the fact that the slave owners who had the fiscal power, they did not have the full unanimity of the people. They forced it on the people by virtue of their capital concentration. So I think that there was two things going on. there was a, you know, a rebellion of people in the South.
Okay.
Slave trade, we like to think that the slaves were only in the South,
Yeah.
but there were slaves in all the colonies.
Yes.
So at that time, your neighbor could have slaves. It was a part of everyone's society. And the North made big money on the slave trade. I think it is Colgate's who were famous for their slave boats, now Colgate College. So there was lots of industry and lots of money flowing around. And so to just sort of take it on the moral thing and say it's a much deeper and muddier trench. And I think the question is not really answerable because
Well, let me complicate your life even more. In fact, by 1776, England was clearly on the way to abolishing slavery.
When did they outlaw? Because it was very shortly after.
There was a case, Stuart versus Somerset, involving a slave brought from the maybe brought from the Caribbean, I don't remember anymore, but brought to England. Gets to England and is on a boat, and the captain of the boat, they all disembark, they're now living in London. And whatever the appropriate period of time is for a slave living on free land to be declared free, passes, and that person sues the captain and says, you can't bring me with you when you go back to Jamaica or wherever it was, I'm free. The head of the British legal system, a fellow named Lord Mansfield, considers the case. First time it comes up, he says, you know, it would be good if you guys could work this out on your own. So come back next month and let me know what you come up with. Come back a month later, sorry, Chief Justice, we can't do this. We'll give it one more try. Third time comes back and he says, all right, you're absolutely right. I have to decide, and I decide that slavery has no place in the empire. That meaning, unless Congress itself passes a law that says slavery is okay, you can't have slaves. Now, he didn't say what he would do if the Parliament, not Congress, if Parliament passed such a law, but he said Parliament has not passed such a law, so you can't do it. Which means that by 1776, the South knew that if they stayed with Britain, slavery would be ended much sooner than if they stayed with the 13 colonies and tried to work out a compromise.
Correct.
All right. And I don't know if I mentioned this. In 2017, twice I taught a course on the U.S. Constitution. And each time I asked the class, and there were about 35 people each time, would you have voted to keep the South in the Union, to be Union, or would you have voted no? First time in the spring of 2017, unanimous vote, no, we would have accepted the South and accepted that compromise and worked it out as we went along. In the fall, it was split 50-50, which brings us to another, what I will call value of American society, which is we're never quite comfortable with compromise. We know it's probably a good thing, but we somehow think of it as a failure. We prefer moral superiority. It's just easier to sleep at night when you're pure. And it doesn't much matter what happens to the rest of the world, but you're sleeping good that night. And we tend to go back and forth in this country between accepting imperfection and saying progress is more important than perfection, or in a moment perhaps that we just had, perhaps not, but perhaps, no, if I can't get what I want, if it can't be perfect, I don't want it.
Compromises when both, a good compromise is when both sides are unhappy.
Well, but the first part of a good compromise is that both sides agree to it.
Yeah.
And that's the part we're having trouble with.
Yeah.
All right. So any questions about anything for the moment?
I have a question, although it's off topic. Just
I like off topic, so don't worry about it.
So I was just curious, you taught a course on the Constitution.
Yes.
What do you think about Citizens United?
Oh, I'm glad I was going to do that at the end because Neil suggested we talk about the First Amendment, but I'll be happy to talk about it now. So tell me what part of it you don't like.
What part of what I don't like?
Citizens United.
I actually like it. I think it was a good decision
Okay.
because, I think that it's funny because it's reversing Citizens United that I actually don't like more. But so reversing Citizens United means a constitutional amendment to take the free speech, split it in half. Half of it would be like us talking together, and the other half would be paid speech, which is, say, taking out an ad or, I don't know, renting a hall. That would be paid speech. And I believe that Congress is so corrupt that I would not want to give them power over speech that costs money, because they would, in the end, make it harder for people to stop that corruption. That's my opinion.
Okay. Let's talk about what Citizens United is, so then the rest of you can have an idea of what we're talking about here.
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Could you explain this?
Yeah. Citizens United, the question was about the power of corporations to, generally speaking, be involved in the political process, and the way in which they could be involved was by the unlimited spending of money. And
On ads.
No,
I understand. On campaigns.
on PACs,
Yeah.
on ideas, on many things.
They could.
They equated money and speech.
It's illegal to give money to the campaigns. It's illegal for corporations to give money to campaigns. So mostly it's about ads. And and the ads are through PACs. So yes, PACs as well.
I thought part of the concept was that in that decision, they determined that corporations have the right of personal speech. They are people.
I'm glad you brought that up.
And that part, I'm not so settled with.
Well, let me explain to you why that part is the least of your problems.
Okay.
And I'll give you a hypothetical. Let us assume that the governor of Maine decides that she, because our governor is a she, doesn't like what the Berwick Library Association is doing here in lovely Berwick, and says, I'm cutting off their money. If the Berwick Library Association is not allowed to sue, what do? The answer is lose a lot of money. But let me take that a step further. The whole purpose of corporations when they were established was to create entities that had the ability to function as a legal body, which includes the right to sue. There is a bill before the Congress, as I understand it, that says if the President of the United States and the appropriate machinery, determines that a nonprofit is not sufficiently in tune with American policies that they can lose their tax-exempt status. You may remember that not many years ago, there were allegations by some groups that the IRS was intentionally targeting certain tax-exempt groups because they didn't like what they thought. If you say that those groups cannot sue, then they have no right, no way to protect themselves. So for me, the problem isn't that a corporation can sue. For me, the problem goes back to what you said, which is I am not convinced that paid speech deserves the same protection. Let me rephrase that. That the spending of money is actually speech. And I'll give you an example. When you went to whatever your favorite supermarket is, and you bought a tube of toothpaste, what was the message you were sending to the checkout clerk? Other than, I want toothpaste? Was there some political message involved in the spending of money? No, the message is when you actually do something. You pay for the ad, you pay for whatever it is you're going to pay for. But when you simply give money to a super PAC with no strings attached, the message is, I've got a lot of money and I want you to remember that. Is that a message we want to protect? Now, Maine and other states have a solution, which is, let's create a system in which there's less of a need to take somebody else's money. We'll use public money. And so far, that seems to be holding up. And what happened in Citizens United is group got together, produced a documentary, and I think it involved Hillary Clinton, if memory serves me.
Hillary the movie. It was called Hillary the movie.
Okay. And the question was that permissible? Was that protected? Could the government say you can't spend that money because you're benefiting a particular candidate? And the Supreme Court ruled, memory serves me, it was probably 5-4, that was all right to do. That corporations, one, have the right to sue, and two, have the right to spend their money as they see fit and be involved in the political process. You know, it is not the easiest thing to be opposed to for the following reason. We've just been through an election cycle, and we all saw ads by nonprofits or by corporations giving their money to PACs and that sort of thing, in which messages on both sides of the political aisle were expressed. So it's not as if only one point of view is spending this money. Yeah.
Citizens United was, so there was this law that was created called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or the McCain-Feingold Act. Both of those names work. And what they tried to do with that was they wanted to make this law that said, we don't want all these nasty ads. Why don't we just make it so that we'll have this law that says no one is allowed to talk about the candidates 30 days before a primary and 60 days before a general election. And that was what the McCain-Feingold Act was all about. We'll just make it all quiet. Then everyone can think about which candidate they want. but they exempted the media corporations. So that meant if you owned a media corporation, you were allowed to talk about candidates. And I can't afford a media corporation, and I don't trust the media corporations, and I just think that that was a problem. So what the Supreme Court said was, hey, I don't really like the fact that Congress said that they can do it and they can't, and actually, you don't have the right to limit speech at all. Like that's in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So that's what happened there. Now, there was this. Now we all want to have transparency, right? We all want to know where this money is all going. There's all this dark money and stuff like that, right? So Congress had this bill called the Disclose Act, all right? So in the Disclose Act, what they said, in the Disclose Act, it said everybody should say all of their donors so that everyone can see who is giving to these corporations, who is giving all of that money, because we want to see who's behind all of these organizations. Well, what happened was the NRA, they were afraid, Congress was afraid that the NRA might say, fight it, because they don't want to know who the donors are of the NRA. So what happened was they exempted the NRA. So can you believe it, that in the bill for this thing called the Disclose Act, that they would say everyone has to disclose everything, except the NRA. Now that's kind of like, wait a minute, I don't know if I like that, right? Imagine if they made a speech bill. Instead of the Disclose Act, it'll be the Speech Act. And they'll say that nobody can speak except the NRA. I wouldn't like that. Do you understand? That's why I don't want to give Congress the power over speech. And this is speech that costs money, is the most important speech. Like, we're talking together, and I think this is wonderful, and it's very valuable. But when you can take out an ad, you can reach more people. And if the NRA is the only one who can reach people, I think that's a problem. Because if they're the ones saying so-and-so should win the election, I think that's a problem.
And the net result of all of that is that you don't get to know who's actually contributing money to many of these super PACs. And interestingly, the reason given by the most ardent supporter of failure to disclose, who's Justice Thomas, is what you were talking about earlier, which is fear of retribution. The fear is that if you make donors have their names disclosed, that other people will take actions against them.
There's nothing in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that we can't make everyone disclose everything. And wow, the Congress is doing such a great job, disclosing everything. They're not. I do not believe that Congress is on our side. And the only thing that's protecting us from this corrupt government right now is the Constitution. That's why I think that Citizens United was a good decision, and I think we should not amend it. And the amendments are horrible. They are so bad. They all look the same. So there have been many amendments to reverse Citizens United, and they all look the same. They have 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph says, all speech that costs money should be under the control of the government. That is not just corporations. That means my speech. If I wanted to take out an ad, Congress could say no. I hate that. And then the second paragraph of these amendments to the Constitution says that corporations aren't people. And that would be horrible. Like he said before, like we need protection. Say we have an organization, and that organization needs to be protected under the 4th Amendment, which is unreasonable search and seizure. So say I have a bookstore, and I put some books out that someone doesn't like. those who control Congress doesn't like, they could just unreasonably search and seize all of my property. I would have no protection under the Constitution.
I want to respond to that
Yes,
part
please.
of it. So likewise, if a corporation wants to, in my opinion, infringe upon the civil rights of individuals, let's say to get an abortion or to get birth control or to work their full to their full potential, it's okay for certain corporations to have the same moral elasticity as everybody else under Citizens United.
Well, I mean, Citizens United was, the McCain-Feingold Act was only enacted for a certain amount of time. Right now, if you're a corporation, you can't discriminate against people. So it doesn't matter whether you're a corporate personhood or not. Corporate personhood only has to do with protections for the company with respect to not having the Congress take your stuff or not allow you to, speak. And
What about Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby?
that doesn't have to do with corporate personhood.
I thought they claimed corporate personhood when they tried to not discriminate against gays, for example.
Did that go through?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the Supreme Court approved that. My turn.
That's the only part I'm with you.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't know that part.
I don't know where to start. The Koch brothers. Let's start with the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers loved Citizens United because it gave them a chance to spend their billions and lie to the public and do everything that they possibly could to subvert every election. I don't care if the corporations are ones that support Democrats or Republicans. Citizens United needs to be repealed. It needs to be taken away. It needs to basically have our elections free of money control. I mean, if you look at the cost of elections these days, it's in the billions of dollars. It needs to go back to like what Maine does. Every time some of the people that I voted for in Maine would to run their elections, they'd ask you to have a corporation-free election, and they would ask you for a $5 donation, and that's what we need to do in this country, is to have it like it is in England, a 2-week election, 3 weeks, where all the money that's collected is public money, and people say what they need to say, the candidates, and then we have an election. What has happened in this country is that the elections have kept expanding and expanding. Next week, people are going to announce that they're running for president in 2028. And they're going to start raising money. They're going to start putting committees together. Their PACs are going to start energizing and starting to raise money. And Citizens United, because of the, I don't know what you want to call it, of the Supreme Court under the present Chief Justice, has allowed this to happen. Americans deserve better. We just plain deserve better.
The Chief Justice is Chief Justice Roberts.
Roberts.
He cannot control the votes.
No, I didn't say, I'm saying he's just in control of the court. I mean, he's the Chief Justice, just like Rehnquist before
I
him.
believe all the justices have a say in what cases they take. So, and they vote on that before the season or their sessions. So, I mean, I can be as angry at the Supreme Court as everyone else, but I can't point at Roberts and say it's his fault.
Let me disagree with you for a moment. I mean, you don't have to, but let me disagree. And we have all been participants in organizations of one kind or another. We went to school, we went to work, we go to houses of worship, we belong to various groups, this, that, and the other. And we know the power of leadership. We know that a strong leader can influence, not control, I agree, not control, but a strong leader who puts some work into it knows how to influence the outcome and get the result desired.
But wouldn't, in a leadership, let's take like a team, a football team, as the head coach, everyone, you can manipulate, it might not be the correct word, you can move players into different positions. You can assign coaches to different things. You can move people. Chief Justice Roberts cannot move any of those people.
You're wrong.
How can he do anything to them?
When a case is being decided, depending on certain circumstances, he has the right to decide who writes the opinion.
Correct, but I can also I can write I forget the
Minority
word,
opinion.
a minority opinion or an addendum to that opinion.
Right, but if I'm looking for somebody, if I want the outcome of this particular dispute to be yes, and I know that it's highly controversial, then I'm going to want somebody who's very good at finding compromise. And that's who I will appoint to write the decision. If, however, I want this to blow up because I think that we cannot possibly resolve it, and so we need to make a mess of it, not the words he would use, to show the world that we can't, that it needs to be decided politically, that Congress has to decide this, we can't, then I'm going to give it to somebody who's not very good at coming up with compromise, who's going to be an extreme version and will write a decision that will not get a majority of votes, but will resolve the matter for the moment.
But if you don't get the majority of the votes, then that's not the opinion, is it? In other words, he can assign someone to write the opinion, but in that room, they've already decided how they're voting, right? He's assigning the opinion to somebody in the majority
On that day.
on that day.
Yes.
And so
But
when they
they're allowed
leave the
to
room,
change
they
their-
know how that decision is made. They haven't
People
read
change their votes.
They do, maybe, but he can't control them.
Well, there's control and there's influence. I agree, he cannot control. But good leaders know how to influence. And some would question how good a leader he really is. Yeah. Please.
I'd like to answer your question now. I thought of it. So here's the thing. During segregation, there were people who didn't want segregation, right? And but there were people who didn't want them to talk. So forbidding them from speaking, because it isn't popular, it's good to have lots and lots of different opinions, because then we can grow out of bad thoughts or bad, I'm sorry to say the word bad, but I'm just saying that you don't want to treat different people differently just because of the color of their skin, right? What if it was popular right now to have segregation was popular, and there was one corporation that had different views? We wouldn't want to tell that corporation that to dictate to what they had to do. That's why they had freedom. Now, I don't agree with what Hobby Lobby, what you were saying before, but allowing freedom allows us to just avoid Hobby Lobby if we want to. You know what I mean? I would like to have freedom so that when the time comes that I'm like he is, voting against slavery, right, when everyone else might not, I don't want the government to dictate or tell me what I have to do, whether it's my corporation or me. Do you understand what I mean? Now, I'm not backing up Hobby Lobby. What I'm backing up is freedom, because I would say, like, a liberal point of view is not very often, I mean, in the past, it hasn't been very free speech and government overreach has been bad for liberal points of view in the past. Who's to know it won't happen in the future? So the Constitution protecting us in any sense protects us from anyone crushing ideas into one idea. Just one. We're only allowed to have this one idea. It could be good, but then what if it turns bad? The Constitution protects us. The Constitution protects us from such a thing. And that's why we need to have free speech. And that's why we need, well, one of the reasons why we need corporate personhood as well, so that the corporation itself isn't being dictated to by, as far as I'm concerned right now, a corrupt Congress.
So should corporations have the right to spend money to lie, to try to influence the American public? And what do you do about it when they do?
Well, just let me interject one thing. I mean, that was my point in suggesting to you that we talk about the First Amendment, about freedom of speech and the other freedoms that were illustrated in the First Amendment, was that how it has changed from when it was written, when the Bill of Rights was written, to today. And that's why I use Citizens United as an example in that, because I felt like it was a total aberration of what the founders had written in the Bill of Rights, is that their intention in the Bill of Rights was for individuals and was not for businesses, then leading up to corporations and other kind of global entities. That it has completely changed, and how these global entities have now become a part of the election process. And that's where I found the fault in the system, where the Supreme Court stepped in and changed the focus of elections by allowing that to happen.
Well, and someone might say, and I'm not the most high-tech guy who ever lived, that in an age with the internet, when anybody can go online and get their opinion sent literally around the world, that isn't that such a strong counter to whatever it is that money is doing, that things should work out nice.
Provided that they're not, doing misinformation, they're not distorting facts, that they're not lying. If people were totally honorable in their speech and basically, told the facts, the truth, nothing but facts, ma'am, if that was the case, then yes, I would completely believe you. But the fact is that anybody can get on Facebook and other social media and can lie like hell and can do whatever they want. And that's where my problem with how the First Amendment has changed, is that it has allowed people to become immoral, unethical, and get away from telling the truth.
All right. I hate to throw history in the middle of this. Probably the dirtiest elections in American history, early 1800s. So, but the question becomes, the whole theory about the way the Constitution operates, particularly the First Amendment, is it's better to allow more speech than less, and in the quote-unquote great marketplace of ideas, truth will tell. Now, you can argue whether that's ever been true, but I think we are all living in a time now when we know that isn't true right now. Right now, the great marketplace of ideas doesn't produce more truth. I certainly believe it produces far less truth.
Yeah, what it does is it produces more. Just
More stuff, less truth. Yeah, please. What is your name, by the way, so I can call you by your name?
Wendy?
Thank you, Wendy, please.
Oh, okay, so with the example of the Disclose Act, which actually really did exist, and it did exempt the NRA, what would you think about a speech act where everybody is forbidden to speak except for the NRA? What would you think about that? Congress could make such a law if that nobody could take out ads, say, or nobody could speak except for the NRA. How would you feel? And I'm asking you, actually.
Okay. I mean, I guess I don't know much about the Disclose Act, but I would hope that there would be a public uproar against it, and just like there has been about Citizens United, and that things would change, and that there would be the possibility of voices from anywhere that where they need to be, where people are unafraid to to speak truth to power, and continue to try to make it a better society. I mean, we make ourselves worse by some of the stuff that that people say, knowing full well that they're lies, that they're not factual, they're not the truth. I mean, I just can't understand how they, can get up in the morning and think of, some more stuff to, to say. Just because you have free speech and it's stated in the Constitution does not mean that you actually have to use it on a daily basis to cause more problems. Sometimes it's better to be quiet. There is so much to be said for quiet and listening than just doing this.
The problem really is the Constitution. So if you're going to amend the Constitution to take away speech that costs money, that means we're giving Congress the power over speech that costs money. And if they have the power and we know they're corrupt, who do you think they'll silence? They're not going to silence the big business. They're not going to silence the people who need protection are the people who don't control Congress. The corporations that need protection under the Constitution are not the ones that own Congress and control Congress. The Constitution is there for the little guy. It's not there for like Amazon. Amazon can do whatever it wants. As much, I mean, as do you?
I don't know.
I do
disagree
not
with
want to
that.
give Congress.
I disagree with that so much. I mean, ExxonMobil doesn't care.
Tell me why.
ExxonMobil, the largest corporation in the world until the high-tech thing, is a global monster among these seven sisters, if you want to call them that, the energy corporations, which for the last 150 years have been the largest corporations. They are immune from anybody really telling them what to do.
That's exactly what I'm saying. We're saying the same thing. What I'm saying is
no,
that...
but what I'm saying is that that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for those energy corporations to
I
dictate.
agree with you. It's not a good thing. But what we shouldn't do is take away the protection from the little corporations or the little organizations that might fight that injustice later. So right now, I do not like the situation that we have right now. I think that we have horrible corruption and it should stop and we need to fight it. But if we give Congress the power over speech, then we will not have any chance at all to fight it. Because then Congress, who's in the pocket of people like that, will silence us. They'll silence anyone that goes against that power that you and I both don't like.
Okay, so the reason
Does that
why,
make sense?
and why is Congress in the pocket of Exxon and anyone else you want to name?
It's usually the revolving
It's
door.
the money.
It's the
money.
It's the revolving door.
If I show up with more money, he'll vote for me.
Yeah.
These guys are for sale.
Yeah, and it's
So-
it's the revolving door, but that doesn't take care of the
So
revolving door.
my chance of coming up with enough money to influence the senator versus the oil companies is not so good. So, it follows the money.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're all raising money for their next campaign.
But it's not. what it is it's not going to stop. So if we give Congress power over speech, that means anyone that goes against what we all hate
I'm not
will
going,
get silenced,
I agree.
and we won't be able to fight it.
I
We need to
understand
fight it,
All
and we need to
right,
fight it
could-
with something other than making
Could
it worse.
we move on?
I think she
I just wanted to ask for one example of, so are you saying, like, if we silence the corporations at the same time, we would silence organizations that we all, in different cases, like, for example, Planned Parenthood, or the NEA, or whatever, or labor unions, is that what you're saying?
Do you want me to?
Yeah. But then we have to stop, because
Sorry about that. So what a corporation really is a legal fiction. It has the ability, so a legal fiction. It means that, like, when we go to court, right? It's, like, say somebody breaks a corporation, like I hire someone to build a deck, and they mess up. I want to bring them to court because I want them to fix the deck, right? When we go before the court, we have to, have to have a person and a person, and that other person is a legal fiction. It's a corporation, but it's a legal fiction. So now legal fictions are, towns are legal fictions, right? They're incorporated in the state or something. The Sierra Club is a corporation. It's a legal fiction. The Planned Parenthood is a legal fiction. They would have no rights if we took away their rights. If we said corporate personhood, take that away, Planned Parenthood would have no rights. They would have no rights under, like I said, the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. The government could do whatever they wanted.
Okay.
Well, I think that,
I mean,
I think though,
I-
like, there's degrees. You have the small business person, and then you have the really large corporations. And I see so much corruption in the large corporations. I could care less if they had a voice.
I agree with you. I think that these large corporations have too much power.
Right.
The only way, though, to get to stop the corruption that we have right now is to not give away our rights so that we can't actually do something that might help. But this is going to hurt us. It's going to hurt us if we can't speak.
Got that out of our system now? The likelihood of anybody silencing anybody as a general matter is fairly limited. It has been attempted historically, generally failed. Recent examples are sedition acts. We had them in this country. People went to jail. A presidential candidate ran from jail having violated the Sedition Act. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. The problem isn't that corporations don't have more than enough opportunity to speak their mind. The problem is the whole nature of a corporation is it's a way to aggregate resources into an entity, which means by definition, with a very few exceptions, they have more money than anybody else. So the question is, how do you work in a system that believes it's better to have more speech than less, which means we do not want Congress or anybody else to stop speech from happening, and that is in fact the history of the United States. It is very difficult to do what's called prior restraint. Very rarely happens. It would have to be something like, I'll give you a local example. You are a journalist and you find out the location of the safe house where a key witness in a trial is being held. And you decide that you want to publish that in the newspaper. A court will likely tell you you cannot do that because somebody's safety is at risk. But for the most part, we allow people to say stuff, including corporations, and then sometimes we decide they've gone too far. Can I finish a sentence? Thanks. Sometimes we decide they've gone too far and we need some form of redress. The problem is, what do you do about excessive lying? I don't have an answer. I mean, the answer is not you stop people from talking. You hope the answer is people think about what they're hearing. I'll give you a personal example. There have been many times in my life when somebody said to me, "Oh, did you hear what he just said? You know, and he thinks blah, 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 blah." My first response is, I know that person. That doesn't sound like something that person would say. We don't do that. We don't sit here and go, you know, Kamala Harris wouldn't say that. Joe Biden wouldn't say that. Angus King wouldn't say that. What we do is go, that damn no good just said it again. The way the government is set up is from the very first 3 words of the Constitution. We the people. It's on us to keep the government honest. And we don't do it. We sit at home and we talk about, well, you know, 4 years ago I went and voted because I really liked that person, but I'm unhappy about A, B, C, or D, so 5 or 6 million of us will just sit at home, but we reserve the right to complain when it's over. We got to do better. It's on us. All right? And I don't have an answer other than forums like this, where people sit down and begin to think seriously, what are the consequences of the way we're doing business? I'll give you a perfectly good example. How many times does the President of the United States really have to get into a debate with anybody about anything? Answer, never. Except to get elected. So why do we make our presidents go through debates, and then we are horrified because they do terrible jobs, and in most every election, at least one of the debates, one of the candidates does a horrible job. And so we decide we're going to vote against you because you don't have a skill that you don't really need anyway. We need to figure out how it is that we're going to decide who we want to be our leaders. We have not figured that out in 248 years. And yes, there are all sorts of, for want of a better word, corruptions that you can do. Somebody lies about this person, somebody lies about this person. We remember George W. Bush was supposed to have done something with drunk driving or drunk airplane flying or something or other. You know, it's easy to make up stuff because most of us don't have the patience to withhold judgment until we get more information. It's much more fun to just jump and go, aha, I knew he was no good. And then when the truth comes out later on, we've stopped paying attention because we're on to something else. So my view is we need to do better. If we do better, they do better. You know, the old saying, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. We don't lead. We take the easy way out. We vote based on who we like and who we don't like, and often even worse. So I hope we can figure out a way to help one another decide who do we want to be our leaders and what do we do to make sure we get them. Because now it's anybody's gamble who we're going to get. Anything, you know, anything can upset any number of us. And we either vote or don't vote depending on something that may be totally unimportant. But yes, I agree with you. I do not want anybody's speech to be curtailed. At the same time, I don't want anybody to be able to lie with impunity. And we need to figure out how we're going to accomplish both of those things, and we haven't. Yes, please, Wendy.
We have
like
Yeah.
2
I will
minutes.
try to be really quick, sorry.
I-
So,
I-
just to say that our biggest problem is consolidated power. So the big corporations that we're all having problems with, how about the problem really is to get rid of monopolies and oligopolies and consolidated power?
We are definitely not gonna solve that in 2 minutes.
I'm just saying that it.
And while I agree with you, one could suggest that the vote that just happened in this country was in favor of monopolies. One could suggest that. We'll find out. That's why
I think both the right and the left are for monopolies. I think both parties are.
I have no idea. I find that a surprising statement, but life is about surprise. The point is, yes, concentration of power, whether it's economic power, whether it's political power, whether it's knowledge power, is always a bad thing. You need dissenters to come forward. And I think it would be a fair statement that what many of us fear right now is that the right to dissent will be limited, if not eliminated. And on that, I call the authority to end what we're doing today. But I have two requests to make of you. One, we have now finished 3 sessions. So I would, one, ask you to send an email to Sharon and to me to tell me if you want to continue these discussions. And then 2, send emails to both of us on what you would like to discuss. Now, we started to discuss what Neil wanted to discuss, which was essentially the abuse of freedom of speech.
Yes.
And how that has been,
Changed over the.
yeah, in a not good way. Nancy suggested that we do one on presidential immunity. Now, what both of those things have in common is both the Bill of Rights and the notion of presidential immunity raise the question of how do we limit governmental power in a way that protects the rest of us? And the next time we will talk about how immunity fits into that. But remember, most of us spend our time worrying about elections and spend less of our time worrying about governing. But in fact, the government governs. And so one of the ways in which you improve the performance of government is by paying attention. Okay?
Thank you, everybody. Grab a
you.
news.